Hey everybody, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. I was looking at a photographer's images recently and I was really struck by how subtle they were. The photographer was very purposeful in terms of how they composed the shot and how they used light and shadow, but their presence was less obvious to me in those photographs than a lot of the photographs that I've been making recently and that I've been evaluating here in our Flickr pool. As you well know, I've been discussing a lot of your photographs and thinking in terms of light and shadow, line and shape, color and gesture, and frequently picking pictures where those qualities are very evident in the shots, and sort of pointing out different principles about how to shoot, how to see, how to compose a frame. But as I was looking at these photographs, I realized that sometimes a great shot can be less than obvious. It can be a shot that uses many of those elements, but can be a little sort of quieter in their application. The photographer William Eggleston is a wonderful example of a photographer who takes very ordinary and mundane scenes, but makes incredible photographs as a result of just the way that he's seeing. And he's using a lot of the principles that I talk about in this channel, but he has a very sort of gentle eye, and the way that he photographs can make it seem that those kinds of shots are very easy to make. They have an almost snapshot aspect to them that sort of takes away from the amazing and talented eye that he and other photographers who shoot along those ways have. So I wanted to discuss that idea using 4 images here. But before we get started with the images, I want to let you know and or remind you that my new book, Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow, is out and available now. At least the ebook version is. The soft cover is going to be out in December. And we've worked it out with the publisher to give a 40% discount off the list price if you visit the Rocky Nook site. The notes will be below in the show notes. And just use the promo code Porello40 and receive 40% off of the list price. And the book goes into a lot of the things that I share on this channel. And it's really about developing a personal way of seeing that not only helps you when you're making photographs, but will also help you when you sit down and look at your images and you try to discern which images are good, which images are bad, and how you're developing your own eye as a photographer. So check it out and make sure to use the promo code. All right, here we have a shot by Gustavo Minas. This was created with the Fujifilm X Pro 2 at 1,000th of a second, f9, ISO 320. Now, this is a remarkable shot. I really like how Gustavo separates this scene, breaks up this scene into these 2 frames. The one on the right with the swimming pool, with the repetition of the squares that are everywhere in this shot, from the wall to the side of the pool, to this area here, the use of the light and shadow and the way that this shadow cuts into this frame and creates this wonderful triangle, the way the light hits this young man's face and creates this wonderful point of contrast, and counterpointed with this area in the exterior where we see that same repetition of shape that we see on the right, which kind of unifies the image, and also the other activity, including this fellow who's walking through the scene and is intersected by the same sort of shadow and light play that we see on the right-hand side. Now, when I look at this frame, I really, it just made me stop. And I really appreciated all the elements that I just described. But this shot is a good example of being purposeful in terms of your composition, because when I look at this frame, I see and can imagine every choice that Gustavo made as he was framing the shot. You just don't get a shot like this by just, shooting from the hip or just shooting one frame. You have to be very exacting in terms of how you're seeing and how you're composing the shot. And he does it to great effect here. And I'm not trying to take away anything from the shot here. But what I'm talking about, and it'll be a little more evident when we look at some of the other shots, is that the presence of the photographer and their choices, at least to me, are really clear. So when I look at this shot and I appreciate it for its beauty and its composition, I'm also aware of of the fact that, man, all these different choices had to come into play in order for this photograph being made. And granted, I'm another photographer, so I'm gonna think in those under those terms. And the casual viewer is not. But nevertheless, there's a preciseness here that I think is both marvelous, but it also gives me a little more, something to think about when I go out and shoot, because I'm at least at this point in my photographic life, am it's just as exacting as this in a lot of my compositions. And looking at this photographer's images the other day really made me think, well, maybe sometimes I need to be a little more casual. And it'll be a little more evident with the next shot. Okay, here we have a shot by Luca Rossi. No XF data here. So here we have this crumpled newspaper on this street, and it is a throwaway scene, a mundane scene that we have seen countless times, where it's rained, there's a crumpled piece of paper, in this case a newspaper that's been discarded on the street. Nothing remarkable, nothing really interesting that most people would think it would be worthy of a photograph. But this photographer saw the beauty and the potential of this scene for a wonderful photograph. And here, just like the previous image, relies on the same awareness of line and shape, the repeating pattern of those cobblestones, and the way that they, are rendered because of the rain. Really remarkable. So that's really strong graphic pattern. And then there's this crumpled newspaper that takes on a shape that, makes it really difficult to define exactly what kind of shape it is. It's its own shape as a result of being crumpled down. And you have the color contrast between the sort of pink, whitish, and the more earth tones that surround the entire frame. And then you have that wonderful gesture of the hand, because even though it's a photograph, that hand still serves as a gesture, just as if someone's hand, physical hand, was within the context of the frame. And I look at this shot, and there's purposefulness behind it, but it's less obvious to me. And part of it is that it's not as complex as the previous shot, and that may play a role in how and why certain compositions come off feeling like the photographer wasn't even there. But I think it's something interesting to look at, because obviously the photographer made some conscious choices in terms of how they composed this frame, the choice to go horizontal rather than vertical, and especially the placement of the paper, of the newspaper, in this particular area of the frame, and the angle from which he chose to create the shot. There's purposefulness here, but it's not as obvious. And I hope that that's making sense. Let's take a look at another photograph here. Here we have a shot by Michelle Rick. No XF data here. But this shot is just like the first shot. You have a really, really complex scene. It's actually a very ordinary scene. It looks like people are in a coffee shop or a restaurant. And it's the way Michelle sees the scene that makes it interesting, because she's using the light and the shadow. She's using the lines and the shapes, the colors, the gestures. There's a gesture here, I think, of a woman turning her head and has her hand up to her head here. There's a figure here who is rendered in silhouette who appears to be on their phone, and the gesture is really, really subtle. But it's all these shapes, this almost mash up of triangles and rectangles and verticals and horizontals and reds and yellows and greens and blues, all of which make for an image that could easily fall apart because of all those different elements. But I think Michelle succeeds brilliantly in combining all those elements in the frame. But again, this does not come off as a shot that would be a snapshot. Quite the contrary. It's a purposeful shot. It's a shot in which the photographer makes a conscious choice in terms of what to include in the frame and what to exclude from the frame. And yes, every photograph is about that choice, about what you choose to include and what you choose to exclude. But as you strive to make more complex images like this one and the first one, I think you have to be really aware of all those graphic elements in the shot in order to pull it off. It's hard to create a shot casually that succeeds when you're getting this complicated into composition. And as a result, I think you pay much more attention to light and shadow, line and shape, in a way that doesn't happen when you're being more impulsive in terms of making your photographs. And that's not a bad thing. But I think that there's something to be said for being able to use that knowledge, that awareness, not only for shots like this, but shots that are just much more subtle, ordinary, mundane. I'm trying to search for the right word for it, and it just really eludes me. But hopefully, with this last image, you'll have a real clear understanding of that. Next, we have a shot by Niladri Adhikari. This was created with a Nikon D90 at 1/500th of a second, f/13, ISO 160. Now, this shot is a photograph that could have been captured in a very different way. One of the things that you'll see a lot of when people are photographing in a boat like this is that they position themselves in the very center of the frame so that the left side and right side of the boat sort of narrow into the very center of the frame, and then puts the figure, in this case the rower, right there smack dab in the middle of the frame. And it basically uses the boat as this sort of leading line to the center of the frame. And they have a really interesting background in which to compose the shot. And you see that over and over and over again. This photographer does something different. And it may have been a practical choice, but I'll give the photographer credit in that he may have chosen to have shifted his position to the right in order to create a much more interesting composition, because it's the placement of the boatman here that I think is really critical to this shot. He is using the rule of thirds in terms of placing him here, but it's much more than just using the rule of thirds in order to create this really amazing composition. It's being exacting in terms of the frame, because if you look at the edges of the frame, both oars are captured at the edges of the frame, right? And I love the gesture as he is about to pull back on the oars, and the expression here. You still get the lines and the shapes of the boats and the wood planks of the boats and how it leads up to him. And then you have that amazing assortment of birds that are flying through the air, and the shapes that they create are just wonderful. The mist and the fog that's present in the air adds a wonderful mood to the shot. But just like all the other photographs I'm talking about today, the photographer is making conscious choices in terms of what he or she decides to include in the frame and where they want to place them in the frame. And a shot like this doesn't call attention to itself in terms of, wow, that is an amazing shot that leverages light and shadow and shape to a great degree. You don't look at it as an exercise in being able to create a graphic shot. But nevertheless, it uses the awareness of line and shape, color, gesture, all of those things. It still uses them, but it results in a shot that seems like, well, anybody could have gotten this. If they were in that position in the boat and they had a wide-angle lens, they could have made the same shot. But I see evidence that not everybody would have captured the shot in the way that this photographer did because of his awareness of the frame and all of those choices. So I think that shooting graphically and paying attention to many of the things that we talk about in this channel over and over again, they're wonderful and they're important, and I think that they provide a really good exercise for all of us to practice. Because if you have that kind of knowledge and experience underneath your belt and registered somewhere in the back of your brain, when you are presented with scenes that are much quieter, you can still factor in all of those qualities in order to succeed in making a really great photograph of a scene that most people would just write off as completely ordinary. But because of the way you see it, you make it extraordinary. I hope that was fun for you. It really was interesting for me to really look at photographs in this way, and it really challenges me to go out and try to see a little more in this way, and not be so exacting or controlling over how I photograph a scene. I suspect it's going to take me a lot of work to get to that point, but that's one of the reasons I like doing these critiques is that as much as it may help you, it helps me tremendously when I go out to photograph. And if you're new to this channel, the Candid Frame is actually a podcast that I've been doing now for almost 13 years, where I interview photographers about their work and careers. Our most recent interview was with a woman called Susan Cease. She's not actually a photographer. She used to be an art buyer for an advertising agency, and now she works as a consultant with photographers and helps them with branding in terms of, gaining entry into the whole, commercial photography world. So if you have any interest in that, or even if you don't, it's a really fun and interesting conversation that gives you insight into the ins and outs of a professional commercial photographer's career. And I hope you check it out and like it. And you can go to thecandidframe.com and you can stream the content there, or you can download it to your phone or tablet or computer by just subscribing. It's on iTunes and it's on Google Play, and anywhere where you play or listen to podcasts, it's available. So check it out, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you like what you're seeing here on this YouTube channel, please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time.